At which point, I think I call Jeremy forward from the back. Now you all know Jeremy Marlow, so I don't need to introduce him. And asked him with, I think Patrick's going to be involved in this as well, just to give us a position statement on where we were on the occupational productivity programme, what we're delivering, what our expectations should be. So,
shall I give the highlights from the paper?
Give the highlights.
Okay. 2 minutes. So, exactly in response to your question, Richard, about how it's looking, how it fits together with the rest of NHSI and our current and planned impact, this paper reminds everyone of what the objectives of the programme were, which broadly split into those 11 national sub-programmes that you see in the paper, which roughly split into 3 areas: the clinical, which is the first and foremost side of things, which is getting it right first time, but then looking at each of the specific clinical workforce groups and their productivity. Then the clinical support services, so diagnostics, pathology and imaging, hospital and pharmacy, and then the services that support all of what providers do, so estates and services, procurement and corporate services. We also have been expanding what we're looking at, because most of that has all been focused around the acutes for obvious reasons, but over the past 12 months we have been looking in depth with Patrick's stewardship at mental health, community, and more recently into the ambulance providers as well. And what we've been doing is where we've seen lessons that can immediately be transferred into the main effort of the programme and what everyone's doing. Heard you mentioning it under the earlier item. One of the other big areas of development has been on how we make all of this information and learning readily available to people who work in the NHS, from clinicians to FDs and everyone else. And that has been through the model hospital and how to do that, and you'll see some stats in the paper about how we've been increasing both the development of that and the uptake and use of it, not least in our own organisation. So it then goes on to explain the operating model, which, if I summarise, really is based around the professional expertise in each of those sub-programmes, what we constantly strive to do to deal with the unwarranted variation that Patrick highlighted in his report back in February last year. Has been to define what good looks like, and ask the professionals themselves to do that based on what we see in the NHS, which, because of its scale and size, can usually tell the rest of the world about what good should look like. It's just we're not great at universally scaling that across the entire NHS, and that really is our challenge. Using those experts and the data to do that is then about applying that, and the big impact we've had, I think, since the last time I was talking here, is to really gel with the rest of NHSI, both centrally and regionally, in how we do this. And that's been helped by building up our regional presence in the four teams with our regional productivity directors, working especially closely with Bob and Elizabeth's professional colleagues in finance in each of the regions. Also within the other national directorates, so special thanks to Ruth in particular for the collaboration on workforce issues and the joint working we've done on that, including joint teams to do that. And when it gets to trickier times, in particular with Stephen and Kathy, how we work with special measures trusts on both sides and making sure whether it's GIRF that can help on quality issues as well as the finance, or into more than some of the other sub-programmes with Stephen and the financial issues. I could give you a huge catalogue of individual anecdotes and evidence at trust level about where progress has been to date. One of the highlights is in pharmacy, for example, where the real professional approach to encouraging and fostering a sort of competitive spirit amongst pharmacists has led to well in excess of £100 million being saved by switching to biosimilars over the past 12 months. In other areas such as procurement, using the transparency of what the pricing tool has led trusts to save tens, hundreds of thousands on particular product lines, which is building up. And on the clinical side, again, with Ruth's help, going in and doing deep dives in sort of cohorts of trusts at a time, including what Ruth was mentioning there, the collaborative approach, which people are so keen on, but also extracting what's already there in terms of the rostering systems and developing that. And we have some further work to do on that, which sort of brings me, I suppose, to another area where I want to make more progress in on that, which is the use of tech in doing all of that, paying to Aaron's points that he was making earlier, making this data more real time in the system for how they use it, whether it's individual management of pathways for patients and making sure we've got a good, efficient, productive system that does that, through to the whole sort of system approach in a hospital, the individual task management of the whole cohorts and groups, right through to when we get into this whole sort of artificial intelligence side of things that can help predict and take a lot of the more manual type of things out of steps in doing that. But that's sort of out in the distant future. We've got plenty to get on in the meantime. In total, what the NHS has planned for providers in terms of their SIPs, which is the currency against which they plan and do this work, and it's what we've absolutely got to work with and improve with Elizabeth and colleagues' helps, was just shy of £1.4 billion in savings in what could be broadly called the Carter themes, and that's what we actively track and look at, and I'll come back to that in a second. In terms of the big risks that you asked us to identify, the two that they've really been the same throughout the programme, and no doubt will always continue to be, which is the bandwidth and the ability for the leadership in trusts to focus on this agenda amongst everything else, and how they organise themselves to do that, and how we can help them organise themselves to do that. One of the big mitigating actions is not to always put stuff down the top of the stovepipe, as it were, and actually with the professions, like we were talking about with GERT, is actually go and help and engage at the doers in there to help with things like the model hospital, then with practical hands-on support to help them deliver the changes rather than sort of by edict through the top. And working in partnership with colleagues in the regions is really important to do that. And then the other is investment in change, whether it's issues with Elizabeth was mentioning the estate and the backlog infrastructure. It not only poses obvious risk to the safe operation, but it also incurs huge costs in running the estate, which is inefficient because of that backlog. But right through to the sort of resource requirements. So when you're running some of these systems, you need the resource to put in and do that. But also where we do see reductions in headcount and staffing, particularly in corporate services in particular, you'll need the money to make those redundancies if you need it in a shorter time scale than natural run rates. In terms of the model for how we assess how this is actually happening or not, I think we've made great strides over the past 6 months or so with Elizabeth and colleagues to get management information in that's helping us do this. So a more granular approach to expenditure data and SIPs information, which we look at each month with Elizabeth. And then using all the other streams of data through the model hospital to drill down exactly what is happening in that. And we're always looking for variance, either against plan, trend in spend, and performance in the other indicators, or relative to previous periods. We're gradually getting ourselves into a pattern with regional colleagues and others to actually work out what the intervention should be to go and take action when we see some of that variance creeping in the wrong direction, identifying it either at trust level or particular service line level in areas, and obviously where there's anything systematic, trying to spot that sooner and deal with it earlier. Which really we're trying to make, as I say, routine and systematic in how we operate as an organisation, learning about how we do that as a team of execs across the piece, and also fitting it into other areas such as use of resources to make it exactly the same pattern rather than duplicating and getting something else running, which we just we did that. And I'll pause there.
Okay, thank you. Patrick, is there anything you'd like to add?
Only just, Richard, to say I think that what is encouraging is some people are doing extremely well. You know, I mean, there are people who do it out there, and one has to observe that they adopt these techniques as part of business as usual, and they've got the capacity to keep on doing it. This is a series of incremental steps. Possibly what's more challenging is those organisations that don't have the capacity and where they need it most, and I think to Jeremy's point, how do we support them and do that, to get the prize we need to get. I think to summarise it, we know what to do and we have colleagues who are proving we can do it. How do we actually get those who are still struggling a little bit more help to push it over the line?
Jim, did you want to come in?
Yeah, so I think we've actually in the last month, Patrick, talked about that in lots of different settings, and it's key to what we do next. We have a very large proportion of providers who, frankly, are just surviving day to day, and it's very clear they need to do X, Y, or Z. They just can't reasonably get to it, and you see that come back to us as people saying they want to understand our improvement offer more. And I think that's really a plea for help to say, I'd really like to deal with this, but I just can't. And it's no point in us getting frustrated with it. They can do what they can do, and they're working flat out. So I think we do need some time to sit back and think about what do we actually do in that circumstance.
Yeah. The bit, I guess, the two things when we talked about this earlier on, Jeremy, that I was particularly interested about with it is one is about the operating model, which you talked about how what you're doing actually links through with what colleagues involved in financial special measures, colleagues on nursing. So your team becomes part of everyone else's team, and we sort of planted you in this organisation. We picked you up from Department of Health with two friends and planted you in there, and then said, grow, multiply, and do stuff. How's that working? How's that sort of operating model working with regional colleagues, working with Elizabeth, working with Ruth, working with Kathy, so that your team is not separate? How's that working?
Well, I think, as I said, I think there's some great examples of where it has become business as usual. So on the workforce side with Ruth and colleagues, it's become business as usual. The bandwidth issue becomes an issue, though, again, for us, exactly as Ruth said earlier, about there's only so much support we can give with what we've got. I'm going to come. That is not a plea for more resources, by the way. I'll come back to that. Although I'll always take them. On special measures, I think it's with Stephen and colleagues. It's a journey for all of us, I think, on how we put that together and respond and support trust, because there's two real aspects to that, which is achieving solving acute financial issues and embedding the sustainable change in terms of efficiency and productivity and how you operate these systems, which don't always work together neatly in parallel. And it is, I think, it's a conundrum. As Jim's just described, it's as much a conundrum for us as it is for the systems we work in, because we have to get this thing landed each financial year, and it can cause distraction from making sure that we don't have to keep landing it year after year. So it's work in progress. The point I wanted to come back to about resources, though, is that as Jim's always said, we don't want to take the keys off these people, but there's lots of people with lots of keys out there. I make. And as a national health service, I think we can be a lot better at using where people do things well to take them out and help others do things well, rather than it all just being an organisation of 1,000 people. There's an organisation of 1 million people out there that we can better use these people to go and lever and improve elsewhere, and that comes right from the talent manager at the top, but also us sort of transferring some of these people and how to do things well, so we're not asking people to reinvent the wheel every time.
Okay. Now I've got Ruth, I've got Glynis, and I've got Kathy all want to come in. So can I do it in that order of when I first caught your eye? I think probably, but Ruth.
Thank you very much. I just want to reaffirm our commitment as a directorate with this programme, because I've got 3 of my direct reports almost, at least half time it feels like sometimes, sat in Jeremy's directorate to deliver it. But what it also has shown is that we've needed to get much smarter about our offers to the system. So we had our work on retention, talking about e-rostering, Jeremy's work on mental health, talking about e-rostering, and are we saying the same message? So we've had to do some smart action to correct some of that, and that's because we've just been working all flat out and not necessarily having the opportunity to work and collaborate as much as we could. So we've done that. That's good. My question, I guess, about this programme is about how we count stuff so that we don't double count. So it's and that, I guess, I'm still not yet completely clear on. And I think as the directors, we've got to make sure we're working to, I look at some of the figures for nursing, And yet I know there's a big programme of work around agency, and also are wanting to make sure that our wards are safely staffed.
Yeah.
So we've got to make sure that we get our counting properly bottomed out, I think.
Okay, I won't ask him to answer that yet, because I had a very similar point as well. But Glynis, Kathy, and I've also now got Sigurd as well, but I'll probably then wrap it up at that point.
It's a really important area, and I can see that progress is being made from what I've heard you say, and also from what others are saying about the work that you're doing. And I congratulate you on that. I think that the interesting thing is that we have a target of 1.4 billion for this financial year. We talked about landing things as part of what you just said. Will we land it?
I'll let you answer that at the end as well. I'll let you pause and think about it for a minute. Well, I'll take the other two and then my little wrap up, and then you can answer. Kathy.
So it's great that all of this is going on, and I know Jeremy said, you know, certain areas where it's working well together. I still think we need to challenge ourselves about whether or not this is a separate programme, because it does feel in some ways that, you know, we've got that as a programme, and it's quite hard work to sort of make sure that we then join it up. You've got another paper coming up around in the improvement work that's going on, and it almost feels to me as though we need to say, you know, is this the way we want to actually go about doing things, and if so, you know, do we not need to sort of adopt a single kind of approach and say this is the kind of, you know, so that it isn't like it's sitting over there and we've got to try and remember to draw it in. It either is or it isn't, in my view. And I just wonder if now we've got to that point, we should be having that sort of discussion a bit more openly.
Okay. I've got Bob wants to come as well. There's Sigurd and then Bob. Did you want to come back again, Glenys, or were you nodding in agreement?
A lot of sympathy. It's a question, isn't it, of embedding this sort of approach and making it just coherent within the entire operation.
Yeah. Sigurd.
My point was really the one Kathy started to make there. It seems to me that at some point, and it's probably once we got the new chief executive on board and so on, no disrespect to you, but you're now heading for Masters New. We need to, I think, look more widely at this question. How do we distinguish between improvement activities that we initiate and drive out there on the one hand, and what I might call either professional standards or expertise, if you like, that need to be made available to those teams that are out there doing improvement. And I don't think we have distinguished at all clearly between those, and it's probably timely. I wouldn't in any way regret what we've done. We've done, you know, both Jeremy in your area and Adam in his have done sterling stuff, but I think we have been running across each other, and you two have probably been running across them in turn. So we need to clarify this a little bit.
Finally, Bob, and I'll pull back and I'll put the questions to Jeremy. He's had them long enough to think about.
Okay, Jim. So I just wanted to pick up a couple of the themes about the maturing of the operating model and how it's better now than it was. Yeah. The cohesion piece, you're absolutely right, and the interaction with regions. And frankly, this all comes together when we start, when the use of resources responsibility that I has in conjunction with CQC really hits the road. And we're only at the start of that journey, but the drive for that will force the cohesion of view. It will force the embedding into BAU. It will force some of the things. And we're in control of that at some level. So it just strikes me that becomes sort of the framework within which further conversations will be able to have around this table and executive team tables.
So, thank you for that, Bob. The two questions I'm probably going to ask you to answer, Jeremy. This is one about, are you going to hit the number? And Ruth's one about, are we sure we're counting stuff once and not more than once?
And they are connected.
And they are So the answer is not yes by counting everything twice.
No. So the two things we principally count in this are actual expenditure. You can't double count what goes out the door. Either does or it doesn't. And the SIP performance. So, and again, they are reported by trusts, and so that's what they say. So, the 1.4 billion is the SIPs, and it is actually 1.4 of a bigger number of SIPs, which is more like 3.3 billion. But they are the things they have identified, and I'm slightly more confident, therefore, as Carter type, as things that we are doing in a recurrent operational productivity sense. And performance to date on those is looking okay, but it's not as great. It's not ahead of what it should be, but they never tend to be by month 4 or 5. They tend to start recording the SIPs more better in later years, and the pattern doesn't look that different. In fact, it looked better than it did last year, but we've got to do more than last year. And then on actual expenditure itself is what we track. Now, of course, that's influenced as much by activity as anything we can do to increase the productivity. Obviously, we want to increase the productivity so we can deliver the activity without spending huge amounts more. And you can't, as I say, maybe you can, but in my simple world, you cannot double count the same amount when it goes out. So that ensures that we don't do that. All the other bits of indicators and objectives underneath there for me are about a management tool to help people deliver the actual change that we want to deliver. And in the same way as you've been talking about quality issues, so at the real front line, you know whether you're doing the right thing or not, which will ultimately end up in that expenditure and that reporting of service.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. I think just taking some of the comments generally that colleagues made, and they link a little bit through the quality side as well, about as this operating model we've got evolves, making sure that all these different elements are properly linked in the way that we work and are as much as possible business as usual. Now, there's danger you bundle everything into business as usual and it sort of falls over on you, and you often need a separate programme to kick things off. But we've got to find ways of, particularly if you look at it from the lens of an individual provider, that the support and intervention from us joins up, and they don't see a cigarette paper between Bob and Stephen and you and Ruth when they're dealing with you. So I think that's just a natural part of the evolutionary process we're in, but it's a very good start. So thank you very much.